You know, they look at this old woman at the web of wrinkles etched deep upon my face and dismiss my words as the ramblings of a mind slowly surrendering to the twilight. But let them. The scars that truly define me are not the ones they can see. They are the septic, jagged wounds carved into my very soul. The ghost that stalks the hollows of my nights is not the phantom echo of a gunshot from some long-forgotten robbery. The sound that shattered my world, the sound that replays in an endless, horrifying loop, is far more mundane and a million times more monstrous. It is the cold, dead thud of an industrial freezer door sealing my fate. That was the sound of my world not just ending, but being flash-frozen in a moment of absolute betrayal. A betrayal engineered by the same hands I once held to guide, by the same boy for whom I knelt to tie his shoes. My son. He wasn't just my child. He was my world. And he stood there counting the seconds on his watch, waiting for the cold to still a heart that had only ever beaten for him. This is not a story. This is a testament. This is the truth I crawled through the icy darkness to deliver. It is a truth that must be told. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, leave a comment and subscribe because some truths need to be spread even if they threaten to shake your faith. Some stories, no matter how painful, must be told. We worked from sunup to sundown. Me behind the counter serving customers, him dealing with suppliers and purchasing. We grew little by little with a lot of sweat and savings. People used to joke that I knew every single cent that went in and out of that cash register. Then the children came. First Michael, then Sophia, and finally Daniel. Michael, from the time he was a little boy, was already interested in the business. He'd hang around my feet, wanting to help check the merchandise, learning how to make change. A smart kid with bright eyes. My chest swelled with so much pride for him. His going to go far, I used to tell Robert. And he did, just not in the way I imagined. I remember one time, he must have been about 12, he sold his collection of baseball cards to a neighborhood kid for a price that was far too high. When I told him to give some money back, he just smiled that charming smile of his and said, "But Mom," he agreed to the price. A deal is a deal. At the time, I brushed it off as a sign of a sharp business mind. Looking back, I see it for what it was. The first flicker of a fire that would one day consume everything. It's often in these small, seemingly innocent moments that the true nature of a person is revealed. Charlotte brushed it aside, then, but that flicker would soon grow into an inferno. Stick around to see just how deep this betrayal truly goes. How could I have known? When you look at your own child, the one you taught to take his first steps, you don't see a monster in the making. You see ambition, you see a spark, and you pray it's the right kind of light, a mother's hope. Sometimes it's the most blinding light of all. The years went by, the corner store grew into a mini-mart, the mini-mart into a supermarket, and before I knew it, we had a chain of 5 stores spread across central Ohio. It was all hard work, you know. Nothing just fell from the sky. No, I'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and only go to sleep when my body couldn't take it anymore. But we didn't complain. It was a good life, you know. Built brick by brick. Robert, poor man, passed away 5 years ago. A massive heart attack took my partner of 56 years in the blink of an eye. He was in the main office reviewing spreadsheets like he did every day when he just fell forward. When Michael came running to tell me, I already knew. I felt a knot in my chest even before the phone rang. It's something you feel when you've lived a whole life with someone. You just feel it. A lot of people thought I would sell everything, you know. Mrs. Charlotte, you're old enough to rest now, they'd say, as if age were an excuse to stop living. Please. I had just turned 74 with a mind sharper than many young people out there. I knew that business like the back of my hand. So I decided I was going to carry on for me, for Robert, for our story. Right here we see the core of who Charlotte is. While the world saw an old woman who should step aside, she saw a life's work worth fighting for. This quiet decision to carry on is the very same strength that will soon be tested in the most unimaginable way. Of course, Michael stayed by my side. My eldest son, with degrees in business and economics, had already been the chain CFO for years, a respected man in town, a family man, married to Jessica, father to James and Olivia. "Mom, you can let me handle everything," he'd tell me with that smile that reminded me so much of his father. And I, like a fool, believed him. The first few months after Robert was gone were a huge challenge. The pain of loss mixed with the responsibility of running the business alone left me exhausted. But I had my son there helping me, handling the numbers while I took care of the rest. Or at least that's what I thought. I should have seen the signs, the small changes in his behavior, the way he avoided showing me certain reports, the meetings, the closed doors, the phone calls he'd cut short when I walked into the room. I've always been a trusting woman, you know. I believed in face-to-face, in a firm handshake, and worst of all, I trusted my own blood blindly. Who would have imagined that the boy I taught to count change would, years later, be counting the minutes for my heart to stop beating inside an industrial freezer? I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a Tuesday. I had gone to do a routine check at the warehouse of our oldest store, the main one. I like to do that at least once a month to see things up close, talk to the employees, feel the pulse of the business. Michael insisted on coming with me. He said he was worried about my health. That I shouldn't be walking through those warehouse aisles alone. At the time, I thought it was a son's care. How foolish I was. I had asked Susan, one of our most trusted long-term employees, to join us to help with the inventory check. We were checking the frozen food stock when he mentioned a problem in the walk-in freezer. "Mom, take a look in here. I don't think the thermometer is reading correctly." Susan and I walked into that huge freezer without a second thought, the size of a large room where we kept meats, ice cream, and other frozen goods. We had barely set foot inside when I felt a strong push from behind. As I turned, I heard Susan scream. I saw my son's face, a face I didn't recognize. There was a strange glint in his eyes. Something cold, calculating. Before I could say anything, the heavy door slammed shut with a dull thud, trapping us both inside. The sound of that door closing still echoes in my head from time to time. It's the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. More than the gunshot from a robber in 1983, more than the crash of the accident that almost took my daughter in 1995. It's the sound of the deepest betrayal a person can suffer. In the first few minutes, I thought it was an accident. I pounded on the door. I screamed. I called for help. The cold was already starting to bother me. I was only wearing a light blouse with nothing to keep me warm. I soon realized it was no accident when I heard his voice on the other side. "I'm sorry, Mom. It's better this way. It'll be quick. I promise." And then I heard his footsteps walking away. At first, I lost track of time. I didn't know if minutes or hours had passed. Later at the hospital, the doctors would tell me I was in there for almost 7 hours. 7 hours in which I beat on that door until my fists bled. All I know is my fists were raw from pounding on the metal. My voice broke from screaming so much. The cold, my God. The cold began to nip at my fingertips, then crawled up my arms, my legs, until my whole body felt like it was being pricked by thousands of needles. The physical pain was a distant misery. The true torture was the storm inside my head. Why? The word echoed in the frozen silence. Why had my love been a failure? Had my lessons on value and hard work somehow twisted into this monstrous greed? The questions spun like shards of ice in my mind. For a moment, despair washed over me. A cold more profound than the freezer's chill. I wanted to close my eyes to let Robert's memory carry me away. But then a different feeling rose from the depths of my soul. Rage. Awe. This is the moment the victim becomes a fighter. In the coldest, darkest place imaginable. It's not hope that saves her, but pure, defiant rage. That anger becomes her furnace, and it's about to fuel a will to live that Michael never saw coming. He would not be the author of my final chapter. I would not let his betrayal be the last word in the story Robert and I had built. That anger became my furnace. I started doing mental math to stay lucid. I reviewed the week's inventory, calculated the store's profits, remembered the safes combination, anything to keep my brain working, but it was getting harder and harder. My thoughts were becoming slow, confused. My eyelids were as heavy as lead. My whole body HDHD. And then it stopped aching, and that was the most terrifying part. When you stop feeling pain and extreme cold, it's a sign that hypothermia is already advanced. After a while, I started hallucinating. I saw Robert standing in a corner calling to me. I saw my young children running between the boxes of merchandise. I saw my mother, who passed away more than 30 years ago, knitting in a corner. It was so real that I reached out my hand to touch them. That's when I realized I was dying. It's funny how your whole life flashes before your eyes at a moment like that. I remembered when I met Robert at a dance in Cleveland. I was 18. He was 22. I remembered Michael's birth. How I cried with emotion. Holding that tiny red whaling bundle for the first time. Our first store, the move to Columbus, the Christmas parties with the whole family gathered, it all played like a movie in my head as the cold was taking me. I was almost unconscious when I heard a noise at the door. I thought it was another hallucination, but then light streamed in along with a startled scream. It was Maria, the cleaning lady. She had heard a faint moan that I didn't even know I could still make as she passed by with her cart of supplies. By sheer chance or a miracle, I don't know. She decided to check. I don't remember the rescue very well. I have flashes of people running, sirens, frantic voices. I remember someone saying my body temperature was 82 degrees, far below normal. I remember the doctor in the hospital talking about a miracle and an impressive will to live. And I remember with terrifying clarity Michael's face when he walked into the hospital room. The surprise, the shock, the fear in his eyes when he saw that I was alive. I was hospitalized for 3 weeks. Severe pneumonia, tissue damage from the frostbite, heart problems. The doctors couldn't understand how a 74-year-old woman had survived so many hours in an industrial freezer. I knew why. Pure stubbornness. I've always been stubborn, as Robert used to say. Stubborn as a mule. My husband would joke. It was that stubbornness that kept me alive. The whole time in the hospital, Michael never left my side. To everyone else, he was the devoted son, worried about his mother, who had suffered a terrible accident. He explained to everyone that I must have gone into the freezer to check on something, and the door had closed on its own. A tragic accident, he'd say with tears in his eyes that seemed so sincere. I almost convinced myself that I had imagined everything, that the trauma and the cold had made me hallucinate almost. Until one night, thinking I was asleep, he whispered close to my ear. "Next time, there won't be a miracle, you stubborn old woman." That's when I made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront him yet. I was going to pretend I didn't remember the accident well, that I was confused with memory gaps from the hypothermia. I was going to buy time because now I knew my own son wanted me dead and I needed to find out why. I only understood the reason when Christopher, my accountant nephew who worked at the main office, came to visit me in secret. He brought a folder full of documents. "Aunt Charlotte," he said with a trembling voice, "I found some strange things in the company's books. I think Michael has been embezzling money for years. And now with Uncle Robert gone, well, it looks like he's sped up the process." It felt like a punch to the gut. My son, my firstborn, was stealing from his own family. Not only that, he was willing to kill me to hide his crimes and take everything. The documents showed suspicious transfers, shell companies, non-existent suppliers, millions and millions disappearing bit by bit, so cleverly that no one had noticed. No one except Christopher, who worked quietly, checking numbers in the back of the office. He realized I was getting suspicious. Christopher told me he moved me off several projects. Said it was cost-cutting, but I kept watching. "Auntie, there's more. I found a life insurance policy in your name with Michael as the sole beneficiary. It was taken out 3 weeks before the accident." At that moment, lying in that hospital bed, my body still aching from the cold that almost killed me, I made a decision. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to despair. I was going to act calmly, intelligently, the same way I built an empire from scratch. I was going to unmask the one who tried to destroy me, even if it was my own son. Especially because it was my own son. Now sitting here on my porch looking at this blue cooler I bought on purpose to remind me of what I went through, I think about how life turns out. The same woman who started as a mini-mart clerk, who raised 3 children. Believing she had taught them the best values, who built a respected supermarket chain throughout central Ohio, almost ended her days locked in a freezer, betrayed by her own blood. But this story doesn't end like that. No, what happened after I got out of the hospital is something few people know. How I feigned fragility while gathering evidence. How I used his underestimation of me against him. How I planned every detail of my I won't call it revenge. Let's call it justice. A justice as cold as the freezer where he left me to die. But wait, before I jump to the end, I need to properly explain how this whole situation began. Because no one becomes a murderer overnight. Not even a son who wants to kill his own mother. There's a story behind it all. A story that began long before that freezer door slammed shut on my back. Michael was always a smart kid, the kind the teacher praises at parent-teacher conferences. From a young age, he showed a talent for numbers, saving the money he earned in different piggy banks. One for candy, another for toys, another for the future, as he would say. When he turned 18, I didn't even have to push him to go to college. On his own, he chose business with a specialization in finance. "Mom, I'm going to help Dad turn our mini-mart into a giant chain," he would promise with a grin from ear to ear. And he kept that promise, you know. After he graduated, he jumped into the family business with everything he had, bringing new ideas, modernizing the system, and convincing Robert to open 2 more stores in neighboring towns. He was the one who suggested complete computerization when that was still a novelty in the region. "I'm keeping an eye on the future," he'd say, and we, proud and foolish, applauded his every move. Over time, he became Robert's right-hand man. He officially became CFO around 2010, but in practice, he was already in charge of the numbers long before that. Robert trusted him blindly. The boys got the business sense he got from me and the determination of his mother. My husband would boast to his friends at the local bar, and I of course would swell with pride. When Robert passed in 2020, it was natural for Michael to take on even more responsibility. I could have sold everything. Sure, I had offers, some very generous, but those markets were our life, our legacy. You don't just throw away 50 years of work. And besides, I always imagined that one day I would pass it all on to Michael. To him and his siblings, of course, but mainly to him since he was always interested in the business. "Mom, don't worry. I'll take care of the heavy lifting. You just enjoy the fruits of your labor," he would tell me in the first few months after I was widowed. At first, it seemed like a blessing. I was grieving too much from Robert's absence. I didn't have the headspace for spreadsheets or meetings with suppliers. I let Michael take the reins while I focused more on the store floor talking with customers, something I always loved to do. The first signs that something was wrong started about 8 months after Robert's death. Subtle, you know, the kind you only notice when you piece everything together and look back. Michael began to postpone our weekly meetings where we discussed the company's numbers. "I'm swamped, Mom. Let me get the spreadsheets organized better. We'll sit down next week and go over it calmly." Always a different excuse. When we finally managed to sit down together, he would bring increasingly summarized reports. "I simplified it so you wouldn't get tired," he'd say, as if I were some senile old lady who couldn't understand a financial balance sheet. Me, who for 45 years controlled every cent that came in and out of those stores. But I swallowed it and accepted. After all, it was my dear son concerned about my well-being. Right. But in the solitude of my house at night, doubt was a bitter seed beginning to sprout. I'd sit in Robert's favorite armchair, hugging a cushion as if it were him, and wonder if I was the one who was failing. Was old age making me suspicious? Was the grief of losing my partner making me see ghosts where there were none? That uncertainty was almost worse than a painful certainty. I felt like I had not only lost my husband, but also my own judgment, my own confidence. This is the quiet torture of betrayal, isn't it? It's that moment you start to doubt your own mind before you can accept the unthinkable about someone you love. Charlotte is standing at a crossroads, and the path she chooses next will change everything. You see, believing the worst about your own blood is the hardest thing in the world. Every day you tell yourself you're wrong, that you're being paranoid, that the grief is making you foolish. You cling to any other explanation you can find because admitting the truth is 1,000 times more painful. It was a form of confinement long before that freezer door closed on me. It was in one of those rushed meetings that I noticed the first clear discrepancy, a sharp drop in sales at store number 3, our most profitable unit, without any plausible explanation. "Michael, how can the store in the Columbus suburbs have dropped 30% in sales in 2 months? I was there last week and business was good as always." He didn't even blink before answering. "It's the economy, Mom. Everyone's feeling it." And there was that construction on the main avenue that made access difficult for a few weeks. It didn't make sense. The other stores hadn't seen such a dramatic drop, and the construction had only lasted 10 days. It didn't justify a 2-month decline. But I let it go. Maybe I was becoming paranoid. Then came other signs. Long-time employees being fired without consulting me. Necessary restructuring, he'd explain. Traditional suppliers being replaced with others I'd never heard of. I got better prices was the justification. The frequency with which he asked for my signature on documents I barely had Tim.